Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Jason Tundra, and I am doing this series as a developer looking back at Fly Free or Die, Starfinder Adventure Path. I'm a developer for Starfinder at Paizo, and making this adventure path has been pretty much my life for the last year. This is our second chapter. The first chapter of this series was what I call the early phase, which is all of the stuff at the beginning, like coming up with the idea, making the pitch, getting the outline written and approved, and recruiting and assigning freelancers to write the damn thing. But now, after a few months went by, I started to get actual manuscripts in, and I can start actually developing. And we're going to start with this one, the one that you can see right there next to me. We're No Heroes. And I wanted to wait until I could get physical copies of this thing before we could record and talk about it. Players, you guys could get copies early, but those of us that are at Paizo, we get our copies normally delivered to us. Well, of course, none of us are in the office, and the warehouse staff has got better things to do. So it took me a while to get my own copies of these adventures. So you guys got them before I did. So anyway, if you're interested, go back, check the first volume, the first episode of this series, and we're going to go all the way through all 6 volumes, and then we're going to do a post-AP kind of wrap-up at the end. All right, so let's talk about this. So let's start off with the beginning. Let's start off with the cover. It's a pretty good cover. But there's some lessons to be learned already. Like, the point of this developer diary is for me to figure out kind of what I learned from the whole process. It's kind of an opportunity for me to reflect on this and kind of, figure out, kind of take stock of how it all went, what worked really well, what maybe didn't work as well. When I first wrote we have to write the descriptions of the covers before any of these adventures are written or turned in. We submit the cover art to the art director. In my case, that was Adam Vick and Sarah Robinson. I think Sarah does all of our covers, art direction. I had to submit the cover art before anybody got any outlines, before any writers started on any of this stuff. And as you remember, if you've read the adventure, and there's needless to say going to be a lot of spoilers in this developer diary, because this is basically a director's commentary and we're taking apart everything a little bit at a time. But if you remember, there's this sort of prison camp sequence where the players arrive on this planet that hobgoblins have taken over. And when I originally imagined this, it was going to be a kind of prison break scenario. There would be this large prison building that the players would break people out of. And so that's the cover art that I wrote. Well, that's not what ended up in the adventure. Like this scene that we see on the cover does not actually appear in this adventure, really, at least not in the way that you see it here. The prison break there's no prison break. But you live and learn. I mean, I grew up in the days of comics when comics would often have images on the cover that do not appear inside the comic. And sometimes they would even tell you, this image does not appear in this comic, right? And the main character, Deminda, is a drow bodyguard for one of the main bad guys in this adventure path, Lord St. John, who we'll get to in a minute. And I like the way she turned out because I think she makes a great PC pawn for drow player characters. There's a fair amount of legacy races in this AP, like drow and dwarves and half-elves and characters, science fiction versions of classic fantasy species. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's perfectly okay, and hopefully some players will get into it. And if you don't like it, then just make them a Morlamal or whatever, and we'll get to that too. Before we get into the adventure itself, I want to talk about the back matter stuff, and maybe we'll just start with let's talk about the working for the player's guide. The player's guide, and this is the art from that cover, from that section. When I originally wrote, and if this scene looks familiar, it's supposed to evoke those shots of the alien crew with, like Ripley and Dallas and the other characters from the Nostromo, like kind of peering into screens and, being in the bridge of their starship. And we'll get to this wonderful player's guide, which was actually written for us by Chris Sims, my old friend, and also before me, the developer on Starfinder Adventure Pass, along with Jason Keeley. Okay, first, why a player's guide? Okay, so we did our first. So Pathfinder's a long history of doing player's guides, but that's not a reason to do one. We added a player's guide in the back of the first volume of the Attack of the Swarm AP. And it's an 8-page article that kind of tells the players, like, okay, here's how to make characters that are going to work really well in this campaign. Here's some plot hooks. Here's like a background for your character. Here's some interesting origins. Like, why are you on this planet that the Swarm suddenly invaded? And it gives players ties to the campaign so that they make characters just for this campaign, and their characters fit very well. They dovetail into plots. And so you know that you're going to have some unique, personalized content as you get farther into the AP. Also included some basic gear and some, maybe an archetype or a theme that your characters can use from the beginning of the adventure path that will fit in very well. Well, this was very well received. I wish that we could do these as separate PDF products because it would free up pages in the adventure. But there's something to be said for including it in the book as well, because getting the PDF is another step, right? You have to go to the website, you have to download it, you have to disseminate it to your players or whatever. And here you can just get it, and it comes in the book, and it's part of the product that you've already bought. And the working for a living section. And the original assignment was for the author of the adventure to write this. I mentioned last episode that I recruited BJ right away to write the first adventure in the AP. And let's clarify something. The first volume is the hardest volume to write. There's two reasons for that, two big reasons for that, and they're both huge. The first one is time. Between the time that the author gets the contract and the outline and the time that adventure is due is like 2 months. Like, there's maybe 2.5. It's really not much time. You've got like a couple of weeks to write an outline, extended outline for what you want to do, another month for the milestone, which is what we call kind of a check-in, where you show the developer whatever you've got. Maybe you're halfway through, and then another month to the final turnover. And this was all happening between like mid-October to Christmas. Like, it was, and people tend to have a lot of things to do over the Thanksgiving to Christmas time period. Like this was a very, very difficult assignment, and BJ had to work her butt off to get this thing done on time. And she got it to me like the 23rd of December, right? Like, and I was like, you could take more time if you want. She's like, I got Christmas to do, man. Like, I get that, right? So the first volume is really hard because the time pressure is very intense. I mean, if you're writing volumes 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever, you have months to write that adventure. But BJ didn't have months, and I really respect the ability to get this manuscript delivered on time in a way that I could work with. The second reason why the first volume is hard is because it sets the tone. Right? Like, when people buy the first volume, this is kind of what they expect the AP to be like. And it can be very hard. Like, the author has a vision, the developer has a vision, and you got to reconcile those two things. And it can be a challenge to work that out and work that through. When I wrote 151, Show Must Go On, for Rob, like, Rob was around the corner, man. If I had a question or I wasn't sure what he wanted me to do with something, I could literally just like kind of lean out of my cubicle and probably catch his eye. BJ didn't have that opportunity. Like, she had, and also, she had some game system stuff to learn. Like, she's got a long history of writing for D&D, for example, and other D20 games. So she knew all the vocabulary in terms of D20 and all that stuff. She's a total pro. but this was her first Starfinder contract, and there was a lot of lore, a lot of setting material for the Pact Worlds. She had a couple of advantages. She's very good friends with Owen Stevens, who was right there, and Owen helped create Starfinder and was our early lead developer. So that was a great resource for her. But it's not the same as having the developer of the adventure path right there to answer questions. All right. Anyway, so the upshot of all this is that we were about a month or a couple of weeks from. We're about a month out, or somewhere in November, I think, and it became pretty clear that BJ is like, look, I'm not going to have time to write all the player's guide. And also that's one of the more rules heavy chunks, right? You're creating feats, you're creating themes, maybe an archetype or something, a lot of gear, and that's just all very mechanical. And quite frankly, it's for a lot of people, it's just not as fun. But anyway, she didn't have time. So, and I was like, great, that's no problem. That's totally okay, because I had Sims waiting to stand by, right? And Sims knew all this stuff like the back of your hand. I mean, he'd helped to create this game in the first place, and was part of the Adventure Path design team. So I reached out to him and I asked him if he would write the player's guide, and he delivered a fantastic article, which not only gives us a bunch of backgrounds, like about 8 unique backgrounds for characters to pick. Like, okay, why are you working for Edge Corp right now? And they're all tied into one of the other major recurring NPCs. So you have kind of a connection to the characters, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But also a bunch of sort of working class gear, like tools that you can use as weapons. Starfinder has this thing where some weapons have a weapon quality that means that you can use your professional skill, your profession skill minor, for example, to use that laser drill as a weapon. That's exactly the kind of vibe we wanted for this adventure path. And he created a couple of new themes for the adventure path as well. For those of you that remember Star Wars, there is this kind of character class that would often be like the people that live on the outer rim, right? Like the people that live on the edge, the Fringer is what they used to call it. The Fringer is the character like Luke, who lives like on some forgotten backwater in the middle of nowhere, and I wanted a Fringer, and so he gave me the Vaster, which is perfect because of course we call our region the Vast. But anyway. And he gave me a working class theme, the prole, the guy who's just out here working for a living, gave him some great cooperative-based, teamwork-based abilities. Themes have some problems, I think, in Starfinder because the first level theme ability is almost always very much the same. And you don't get another one until 6th, and then you don't get another one after that until 12th. Well, most campaigns don't go to 12th level. And so in practice, the level 6 theme ability is the only interesting thing about it. Like that's the one reason why you get it is for that level 6 ability. And I like to make themes more of a part of character creation. I really like the way that P2 does it with backgrounds, where you pick like a background, but then backgrounds have a feat, and you can take other background feats that link into that. And if you want it, so you have some choices, and you can continue to pick more background feats as you level up. Anyway, so Chris was very, and also he did a great, something I did not have in the outline that I was really excited to see is his decision to make this, we knew that it was going to be an in-world document. In other words, a lot of this player's guide is a company catalog. It's a PR document created by Edge Corp for their new employees to kind of employee orientation, right? But what Chris figured out was, well, what if somebody like hacks your new orientation document and starts giving commentary on it? And we were able to do that with a really interesting font and color so it pops out. So you kind of have this like, okay, here's the company giving you the propaganda line. And then this veteran Edge Corp employee is like popping in once in a while to tell you how things really are. And it made it feel like a story. And I really love the way that it turned out. Let's talk about Edge Corp for a minute. Edge Corp started off pretty straightforward as a Weyland-Yutani kind of character role. That's their narrative role. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, we're talking about the great evil company from the Aliens franchise. We have evil corporations in Starfinder. We got plenty of them. The one that gets the most screen time is the Aspes Consortium. We talked about this a little bit last episode. But I decided, and I got clearance, Rob was okay with it, to create a new company for this adventure path. And Sims helped really flesh this company out. It had no name. It was just the company until Sims figured out, well, at first it was just, I was calling it Jameson Corporation because I had this idea of this mysterious founder, Tarn Jameson. And I didn't want to say who Jameson was or anything about his background. I want to kind of make him mysterious, like the creator of the company in the Aliens series. And Sims was like, well, it's got to have a hyphen in there. Like, you got to have a blank Jameson, right, for it to really be like Weyland-Yutani. So he came with this idea that Jameson got bought out by a Vescarium firm. And that created Evgenia Jameson Corporation, which now is just EJ. The E for Evgenia and the J for Jameson. And so it's EJ or Edge Corp. And that, getting people to pronounce EJ as Edge instead of as EJ Corp, has been an unexpected hurdle in this adventure path. But with editorial help, we've been able to get through it most of the time. So yeah, it's Edge Corp, and there's a lot of lingo, like taking it to the edge, and we're flying on the edge, and it's all that sort of corporate lingo, you know, like those of us that have had to work in the corporate world, you both simultaneously dread and roll your eyes at. And he gave me this cool set of like slang and lingo for Edge Corp company characters to use, and it helped create that whole feeling of a universe in which your characters are alive. And for the role players to give them a sidebar of company lingo. That's just a gold mine there. For those of you that are, I'm keeping track of all this stuff literally with Post-it notes posted on the inside of my adventure. So there's a conversation, and one of the things that happened in this player's guide is what alignment are the player characters expected to be. And I think that at first your assumption is, well, this is a game, this is an adventure for neutral characters. And that's true. But also, as we talked about a little bit last volume, I think it works really well to have a good character in the mix, or even a good character as captain. The Expanse being a great example of this, right? Like the Captain of Rocinante. He's like, you know, he's lawful good. He just doesn't like anybody to know it. You have a character that's good, and that character is kind of the moral compass or the voice of conscience as the characters do things that are self-serving. What you don't want is somebody who's like really evil. I don't personally like to run games where everybody's evil, and I don't necessarily. Now, I'm not here to critique your game. Like, everybody does it differently, and like there's a million ways to role play. Personally, I don't necessarily think that it helps the hobby. Like, I'm in the hobby as a business, and I kind of feel like if I write an adventure path where you are playing evil characters, that can be harmful to the industry, to the reputation, and to the way that we talk about gaming. I find it more helpful to write adventures in which the characters are good or neutral, and that the story helps you make tough and interesting moral and ethical decisions. And ultimately, the universe rewards people who do good, and it punishes people that do evil. And as someone who's participating in this industry, I just think that's where our company ought to live, you know? So anyway, you'll have conversations with your players about this. You can run this as an evil AP. That's not the intention, but of course, anybody can change any adventure to do anything they want. But I really think it works best when you have one or two real good characters and a couple of neutrals, and you get this conversation between the good and neutral characters. So we're like, well, what are we going to do? Because there's a lot of choices in this adventure path, even in this adventure, and we'll get to them pretty quickly, where the player's like, well, what are we going to do? And the good characters will be like, well, we have to do what's right. And the neutral characters will be like, we need to do what feeds my stomach, right? And that's a great conversation. Like that's, I think, a conversation really worth having, because I think it mirrors something that we're all experiencing in our own world, like in our daily lives. And that was a huge goal for this AP, was to create a story that we could relate to, that where the protagonists of this story are somebody that you can see yourselves in. Let's talk about the anti-hero for a minute. There's a brief mention of that. Like, your character might be an anti-hero, and I think anti-heroes can work in Fly Free or Die. The anti-hero, but I'm using the what does that mean? Like, the definition of an anti-hero can be kind of slippery. Let me tell you what I mean. And when I talk about an anti-hero in this player's guide, what do I mean? I mean a guy, a character, a person who does the right thing, but they don't do it for the right reasons. Like, okay, they might stop the organized crime boss, but they're not doing it because stopping the crime boss is the right thing to do, or like the crime boss is terrorizing other people. Like, they do it because the crime boss owes them money, right? They do it out of revenge. When Liam Neeson says, I have a very specific skill set, those are revenge dramas. And that's not, in America, that's kind of a license to kill. But that's kind of a classic anti-hero trope. You're not doing the adventure because it's the right thing to do. You're doing it because this guy pissed you off. It just happens to also be the right thing to do, but that's not why you're doing it. That's an anti-hero in my vocabulary. I think anti-heroes can work in this adventure path. But I think a group of them is depriving you of some really great role-playing moments. But having one great anti-hero on the team who's just like, yeah, okay, we're going to go steal the starship because I want to steal the starship, right? Not because it needs to be stolen, but because I want to steal it. That kind of character can be very helpful because it actually keeps the party on track with the plot line, but it also allows you to role play the character who's kind of evil curious, right? You're shadier because and it can be a great zone for players to be where they feel like they can break out of what they feel is a constricted or tightly restrained plot line. There's 8 backgrounds in this player's guide, and each one of them gives the player a connection to one of the recurring characters. And the biggest one, the most important one by far, is the Callistocrat upbringing, in which your character is a relative, a sibling, adopted sibling of Aleene Resora, one of the primary antagonists for the AP. And she is in this Callistocrat family, the Prophecies of Calistrate. She grows up in a family that follows the Prophecies of Calistrate. And so your character also is part of that family. But you left. And you haven't seen Aleene for a long time. As I was developing the adventure, this was by far the background that I had to think about the most. So when you break into Aleene's office, there's a picture of a family picture and your character is in it, for example. Or when you're on the same station as Aleene Resora in Volume 4, what does she do when she recognizes you? Like, I didn't know that the players would have a person with that background. Like, well, maybe no one's picked that background. So Aleene doesn't recognize them because she doesn't know them. But if they have somebody with that background, then Aleene Resora is going to know their brother/sister/sibling. And if they do, how does she react? All of those if-thens take up page space. Like, as a writer developer, you cannot accommodate every possible if-then condition in an adventure path. All you can do is try to predict the big ones or the most problematic ones and give the GM the advice that they need to cover them. And they're going to have to improvise the rest. But the Aleene Resora background, where one of the players is her sibling, kept popping up. And I'm glad that we included it, because I think that a lot of players are really going to get into it. Like, oh yeah, like one of the main antagonists is my sister. Like, that's classic. That's soap opera drama right there. Like, who wouldn't dig that? But it was a handful in terms of development, because you have to write the adventure for both sides of that choice, that you do have a player character who's a sibling and that you don't. And this is going to be a recurring theme as we talk about this volume throughout the whole adventure path, really, that space is at a premium. You just don't have room to cover every eventuality. And when you add these branching choices, it forces you as a writer and a developer to make very hard choices about what gets left out. And you're bound to piss off somebody because you didn't include X plot contingency. And you're like, we're doing the best we can here, man. And then finally, I want to mention that there's some equipment in the back, including little blue pills and little white pills. This is just, quite frankly, I wanted to address some issues that are going on in the world today. You know, like the opioid crisis is a serious problem. It's caused increased rates of death and suicide among white working class Americans, largely, over the last 10 years, and it's horrifying. And I wanted to kind of bring that to the surface a little bit in the little way that I can in an adventure like this. And so that's what the blue pills are for. They're opioids, basically. They're OxyContin, you know. And then the white pills are straight up trucker amphetamines, right? Like, there's a famous song, maybe the best trucker song ever written, "Willing," which features in a wonderful camera movie, The Abyss. And one of the chorus lines is, you know, if I have weed, whites, and wine, then I can drive this truck anywhere. Well, we already have Hyperleaf, so I didn't need to add that. I just added the whites as a reference to trucker culture, you know, and a little bit of warning, like, hey, you know, maybe you should maybe you shouldn't have to fly your ship for 2 weeks to get to your destination. Maybe that's a little unreasonable. Well, anyway, the rest of this back matter material. So the second main article is the Galactic Trade article, and it's worth maybe getting into a little bit. This is the PC Starship, which is the ugliest looking like bus, right? BD 514. But it's important to remember that the players work for the company, and their job is to carry stuff from one planet to another. And I wanted to embrace that and really just, you know, like, that starship's not going to, making it look cool is not a priority for the company. What matters is that it can carry a lot of cargo, and we have a pretty reasonable and I think pretty cool design in terms of its interior and its stats. It does exactly what a cargo ship needs to do, which means it has no weapons. It focuses on cargo capacity. And it's got pretty good shields and thrusters and everything, but most of it is about carrying space. I grew up on games like Traveler, and then later games like GURPS. We talked about this last episode, which had economic systems for carrying and building and for carrying cargo and making money off of interstellar trade. How do you find a cargo? How do you negotiate to buy it? How do you load it into your starship? How do you carry it to a new planet? And then how do you sell it once you get there? Starfinder doesn't have rules for any of that stuff. Instead, it more or less hand waves your starship. When you level up, you get more build points based on your tier, and you can just get a brand new starship. You can upgrade your old one, or you can just you can give the keys away to a random person at Absalom Station and pick up a new starship. We let the GM and the player group figure out the story behind that, but we assume everybody has a starship, and the starship is always of a tier equal to your level. And we don't really explain how you get that starship or how it gets improved. We give some hints or some advice, some suggestions, sort of story hooks, but it's a pretty short paragraph. Well, I wanted to get into the economics of starships, and I wrote this article about doing all those stages that I just explained: how to find a cargo, how to buy it, how to load it onto your ship, how to transport it, how to sell it. And it was a challenging article. I think my poor partner Keely was a little afraid to develop it because he was afraid he would hurt my feelings. But the final product is pretty strong, I think. There's one critique people are going to throw at it. It doesn't use credits. The players are still using build points for their starship. Okay, and a lot of people, especially GMs, are like, well, I don't want to do that. Like, I want it all to be credits. Like, you should buy a cargo with credits. You should sell it for credits. Okay, well, there's a huge problem with that in Starfinder. In other games, you can do that because a laser rifle is a laser rifle, and a character who's just starting off in Traveler and buys a laser rifle, and they can improve their skill with that laser rifle, but the laser rifle is a laser rifle the whole way through. Maybe it gets a little better. You buy like a new fancy scope for it, or you build a new battery pack or something. But basically, a laser rifle is always the same. And you can have 1 billion credits, but your laser rifle is still a laser rifle. Well, Starfinder doesn't work that way. Starfinder has 6 different versions of laser rifles going from level 1 to level 20. And if you have 1 billion credits, then you spend 1 million of them to buy yourself a level 20 laser rifle, and now you're a level 2 character with a level 20 laser rifle. Our encounters are built around what we assume your character is capable of doing, and in Starfinder, your weapons are tied to your level. If we lumped Starship economy in with the player character economy, then players would face very tempting choices that would break the game. Okay, we've now sold our cargo of whatever, thumba berries, and now we have 300,000 credits. Well, we could use that to buy a new drift engine for our starship, or we can all spend 75,000 credits apiece on an incredibly good weapon or suit of armor. Well, which of those two choices are players going to do? They're obviously going to do the second one, right? And now they've broken your adventure because now they've got their weapons are too good, their armor is too good, and they're going to walk through the rest of the encounters, and it's not going to be a challenge, and then they're going to feel like the adventure is boring. The adventure is boring based on choices they made, but we, the designers, encouraged those choices because of the way the game system is built. Instead, we move the economic stuff into a separate currency so that the money that you use to buy your player character weapons and armor is separate from the pool of money you use to improve your starship and buy cargo. And that way, you don't have to make that choice. You can't sell your laser turret to buy everybody level 20 armor, because that would be bad for the game if you did that. Now, if we were running a game where weapons were not tied to level, where equipment didn't have item levels, and then we could do that system. Maybe we could do a system where it was all one big credit pool. Maybe because you do more damage based on your level. Like as you go up in level, your laser rifle does more damage. And then it doesn't matter. And then you can buy the super pricey weapon, and it's not a big deal because the damage, it does a die 10 because you're third level, and third level characters do a die 10. But that's not the system that we have. So originally there was a long sidebar explaining all of this. It got cut for space. It's down to like a couple of sentences in the body of the essay, but it's real, and there's no way around it. Like, the reason why you don't use credits for the Starship economic system is math, and there's no, it's just the game that we have. If you are a GM and you decide you want to change that and you want starships to cost $1 million credit, make them like buying a house, right? We're like, okay, I'm going to buy a house and it's $300,000 or whatever to buy a low level starship. And now I have to pay payments on it, and I'm going to, spend 25,000 credits to buy a laser turret for it or whatever, instead of spending build points. You can do that, but be prepared to rewrite every encounter, or to deal with encounters in which the players are grossly overpowered because they've used money that you expected them to spend on their starship on their gear instead. And then their starship will be underpowered. So when they get into starship encounters, their starship gets the shit kicked out of it because they bought laser rifles instead of weapon turrets for their starship. Well, and you can just say, well, that's their choice, I guess, and we're just going to play it the way it goes. Well, okay, but be prepared for that stuff ahead of time and plan for it, because your game is going in a direction that I, as an official Starfinder developer, cannot accommodate. I have to write to the game we have rather than the your own table. And I encourage you and your table to do whatever you want to this AP. And like, please, if you want to total sandbox it and just pretend that every build point is 10,000 credits or whatever, do it. But you'll see all the problems as you play. And I'm not saying those can't be addressed, but they need more room to address than I had in this adventure path. Otherwise, not much else was cut. There's one very minor rules thing. Originally, there were rules for maintenance that you had to every month you had to spend build points equal to the tier of your ship just on parts and fuel and maintenance costs for your starship. And if you didn't spend those, then you couldn't use the drift, and your travel times in interplanetary space, in real space, were longer. But we cut that. And my only other regret about this article is there's a little bit of a defensive crouch to it. There's a bit of there's a few moments where it says, like, I know that all this economic stuff probably doesn't sound really fun to you, but give it to the player who likes dealing with math and spreadsheets, and if you don't like it, don't use it. That's all true, except for the part. Well, actually, I wish that we didn't cast it in that kind of negative light. I wish that the article didn't suggest that you aren't going to like it as you're reading it. My understanding is that EVE Online is pretty popular. Like, there's a lot of people that like that aspect of Starship science fiction role playing, and every group I've been in has somebody who's the spreadsheet king. And let them dig their teeth into it, and I hope that they like it. The only other section of this back matter is the Alien Archives bit, and I would be remiss if I didn't talk about this guy, the Roomba with a knife, or the space Roomba. I think this thing got me in some trouble. It was pretty shortly after this that the change was made to our policies, where all new Alien Archive monsters have to get creative director approval. And quite frankly, I suspect that I brought this on myself because of the space Roomba. I found out much later that this is a monster created by BJ for the adventure. There's an infiltration of an anosite facility, and there's a couple of anosite security guards in there, and they're basically like they masquerade as sanitation robots, but they actually have laser turrets and little saw blades. They're basically anosite operatives. But I found out much later that apparently there was an ongoing sci-fi joke about a Roomba with a knife that becomes Sergeant Stabby, and that it becomes the mascot at the local Space Marines. And I had no idea that I was playing into an Easter egg when I got this. But you know, there's room for a little silliness in Starfinder, and you know, we're a game with walrus people, so I think that the game will survive the Space Roomba. And BJ was delighted to see it get all the way through the approval stage. So I'm glad that we could accommodate that. Let's get to the adventure itself. The adventure needed to present interesting ethical and moral choices, and also needed to set the tone. So the players are traveling from one planet to another, basically taking these jobs. And at every time they do one of these jobs, the job goes bad. This can be a really hard sell for players because they didn't do anything wrong. Like, it's not their fault. The players are doing everything right, but the adventure is designed so that things keep going wrong. And this can frustrate some players, but it's important to the AP, and quite frankly, it's part of the theme of the story. Sometimes bad things happen to good people, and it's not they're thing you can't control, especially at low level. That fact that the universe is run by these faceless mega corporations that you have no control over, and they have control of you. Like, it's the company tells you where to go and what to do, and when bad things happen, the company blames you, and there's really no way out. There's no good answer to some of these problems. Your players need to buy into this. Like, this, there's some challenge on the GM here to sell this aspect of it. Some players are going to like it, and some players, I suspect, won't. But if you've got players who are like, well, I kind of want to win all the time, they're going to have a hard time in this campaign. Fly for Your Die has got a lot of moments where failure is hard coded into the scenario, and it becomes a question about how do you deal with that failure when something fails, and now you have to make a tough choice because you can't pay both people. This first job is a great example of that. You carry this perishable cargo from Castrovel to Akaton, and by the time you get there, your client has been assassinated and their company bought out by another corporation, and the client is like, I don't need to buy your cargo, and I'm under no obligation to do so, so you can stick it. Well, eventually you can find another seller, another buyer, and you can unload the stuff, but you only get half what you were expecting to get. Okay, now you have two different people to pay. The person that sold you the cargo is Uno Pratt, like this good-meaning Castrovelian grocer who's planning to retire on this money and hand his company off to his daughter to run. Like, he's got his retirement all lined up, and this job is his retirement money. Or you can pay the company who expects you to deliver X amount of profits for this job. Immediately you're in a tough spot, and you have to decide, who are you going to stiff? Are you going to stiff your boss and risk the ramifications of that? Or are you going to stiff Uno, who's just a nice guy trying to do his, and you know, you promised him money. Well, there's no way to pay both. This is a no-win situation, but it's exactly the kind of tough choices that the players are going to be making throughout the AP. And I wanted to set that up really early and make the players have to pick. If they're good, if the good voices win, they'll pay Uno. And then the company is like, well, you didn't make profit on this job, so, you know, we're going to put you on probation or whatever. We're going to do a profit analysis on and disciplinary action or whatever. Like, the company's going to breathe down your neck. If you're neutral, you pay the company, and you're like, well, sorry, Uno, like, that's the breaks. And then Uno's like, well, I guess I can't retire after all, and I got to go back to work. And he's lost all of that money. He's an old guy. He deserves to retire. Like, he worked hard for this, right? Um, the rest of the encounters, like the space goblins and the whole business of the beginning encounter. And I wanted to use space goblins because they seem sort of classic to me, and we don't get to use them as much as I'd like. They try and steal cargo off your truck as you're moving it. There's a lot of truck action in this first volume. To some people have been discouraged by not seeing enough starship stuff in this first volume. Well, that's because your starship doesn't have any guns. Like, there's no starship action because BD 514 has no weapons. It's completely unarmed. But I could do some trucker action instead, and that I was glad for that, because the characters are in many ways space truckers. I couldn't call them that on the back of the book because space truckers is such a clearly aliens universe kind of thing. But that's what they are. In this first job, the players end up going to Hive Market on Akaton. There's an interesting example here of some parallel development. I was working on this encounter. I was developing this section of the book, and I saw the reference to Akaton, and I read everything I could about Akaton in our source books and about Hive Market. And Hive Market is patrolled by these kind of mysterious ghost-like creatures called the Kulan, who enforce the law in Hive Market. Well, I asked around because we're going to go to Hive Market. You've got to meet a Kulan. Like, that's like the most distinguishing, cool thing about Hive Market. We've got to have a Kulan show up. So, but it turns out that, okay, Kulans are coming out in Alien Archive 4, which is now in stores. But this is a year ago, and nobody knew about Alien Archive 4 yet. And Alien Archive's version of Kulans was very different than what I thought they were going to be. I thought they were sort of ghosts, but they turned out to be a fae. And they were also way too high level. So I did kind of a low-level version of a Kulan, scaled all of its powers down, and made a way for the player characters to interact with them. The point of the story is when the players go to a location in the patch worlds, find out what is most distinctive and unique about that location and give it to the players, like have them interact with it, because they may never come back. Like, don't leave this stuff on the table. If there's something really cool about a locale, find a way to bring it into the adventure and make it so, and also that becomes a way to distinguish that Hive Market job from every other job we did, because, hey, that's the one where that Kulan ghost creature showed up and right, and like tried to kill one of us. The middle section is the Gitaron job. So the Hive Market job goes bad. So now the players are in trouble with the company, and they need a new way to make some money. And this becomes an arms running job where they get a bunch of weapons to smuggle into, or not to smuggle, but to deliver to a hobgoblin dominated planet. So for those of you that know the organized play, Starfinder Society has got this whole subplot going on at the Gitaron Authority, making war, which is a hobgoblin empire, making war on their nearby rivals. And I actually wrote one adventure that kind of tied into that very loosely. Well, and that's the only way that I would have known about it, right? Because I don't read all the Starfinder Society adventures. There's a lot of them. There's like 2 a month, right? Like, there's an insane number of those things. I don't keep up with them all. But I've got Jenny and Before Her Thirsty to kind of give us a brief appraisals of what's going on in OP. But my point was I should read them all, because there was an opportunity to link in here. And the whole fact that the players go to this hobgoblin planet and interact with the Gitaron Authority was me tying in the Starfinder organized play plot line into the Fly Free or Die adventure path, so that you can feel like all these things are happening in the same universe. So the players are hired to deliver these weapons to a hobgoblin labor camp on the surface of this conquered planet that they've taken over. And in the meantime, they got to get the job. So they go to another planet. They go to it's not Octurne, is it? They go to another planet, the Patch Worlds, where they meet with their drow, and they get the job. And this allowed me to do some kind of interesting stuff with that. Well, anyway, the bad guy here, one of the I forgot Tariqa. We'll come back to her in a second. So I got to have a Solarian, and I swear to God, if I have one thing that I am more proud of on this adventure, this particular volume than anything else, is that I got to have Kirby dots on my Solarian sword. I don't know why, but for some reason, like, I'm an old comics guy, and Jack Kirby's art is fantastic at this kind of cosmic god sci-fi fantasy stuff, and it always seemed to me a shame that we didn't tap into some of that cool Kirby stuff. This particular guy, Horizon, is a drow Solarian that you face in this middle. So when you go to this bar to get the job, and he's like a bounty hunter, and he's got this gnome with him, and he thinks he's nabbed the mark, but it's the wrong gnome. And I'm like, okay, well, I got to have my Solarian with Kirby dots. If I had my way, every Solarian, solar armor, solar weapon, Solarians would use Kirby dots. And if you see a character with Kirby dots in a Starfinder book, you can pretty much know that I wrote the art brief for that. Let's get back to Tariqa. Tariqa is the player character's fixer, their main contact. This is very useful in an adventure path. It's pretty commonly seen. You create an NPC who's friendly to the players and kind of helps guide them a little bit from one story beat to the next. Tariqa went through a lot of evolution. In the original outline, she was a Morlamaw. Morlamaws are kind of a fan favorite species amongst Starfinder players. It could be Kate Baker, and they're basically walrus people. And I was all over that. Like, sure, what the hell? Let's make a. And Tariqa has a daughter, Shan, who shows a major character in Volume 3 of this adventure path. So there'd be 2 Morlamaws in the AP, and I was down for that. But BJ didn't find that very interesting. She wanted to brainstorm maybe another species for Tariqa. Okay, that's cool. So the neat thing was, this all happened without my involvement. She asked me about it. I was like, sure, that you decide what you want to do. Like, tell me what species you want to pick, and then hit me up with it. Well, anyway, Shan is in Volume 3, and Joe Piscini was writing Volume 3. So she reached out to Joe, and they threw some species around. Joe, of course, he's the lead designer for Starfinder. He knows every alien species in the game. He was actually doing our Alien Archive 4 at the time. And so he could throw out potential like aquatic species, because Volume 3 takes place largely underwater. So we need to have a species that's at least, they don't need to have a swimming speed necessarily, but they have to be comfortable in a underwater environment. And they both agreed eventually to do a Bernary instead. And so Tariqa became a Bernary, and her name changed at the same time as part of that change. And we got this wonderful character. I love her, like olive green working class overalls, jumpsuit with the Edge Corp logo on the shoulder. Bernary are famous for having a sort of fetish object that they manipulate as part of their sort of otter culture, and it reassures them and soothes them. They worry with the object, basically, and her object is her wrench. She's a single mom. A couple of the player character backgrounds tie into Tariqa. She's a maternal figure. She's sort of motherly. And we gave her this great kind of y'all way of talking throughout the AP. She turned out to be a really great character. And the original outline referred to her as a fixer. She's not really a fixer. She's originally a sort of dispatcher. She works for the company, and she gives the player characters jobs, just sort of telling them, okay, here's your next job kind of thing. But then when the player characters all quit the company, she quits too, and she kind of goes solo. I guess she's a fixer in the sense that she finds you work, but she doesn't have a lot of that shady, I don't know, I still think of her as a dispatcher, even though she's not really working for anybody by the end of this volume. Anyway, Tariqa turned out pretty good. And I bring it up because an example of how your writers can work together to find a solution to the problem, and everybody's happy with it. Like, don't be afraid to let writers do that. As when the Gitteron job, now the Gitteron job, the climactic point of the Gitteron job is this mountainside truck chase. It's a big set piece. The player characters deliver these weapons to this hobgoblin camp. But the hobgoblins are like, you can't put those here. Like, we have a bunch of prisoners here. Like, why would we want to stockpile weapons next to a bunch of prisoners? That's dumb. This is a little bit of me realizing that maybe my outline was not the greatest. Like, you notice sometimes afterwards when the manuscript is turned in that maybe the outline you wrote has some logic problems. And anyway, so you're like, okay, well, let's deliver all these weapons to this labor camp. Well, okay, like, you don't put a bunch of weapons next to a bunch of people who want to break out. Like, that would be a really dumb thing to do. And here I was doing it. So you find a way to make it work. So she's like, no. Like, you can't leave them here. You got to take them to our depot, and depot's up the mountain. And the players are contacted by a dwarf spy who's in the camp working for the resistance. And the spy is like, okay, well, you could do that. Or you could let the resistance have the guns, and we can help kick these hobgoblins off our planet, because we're just miners. Like, we're just trying to make a living on this planet, and these hobgoblins are coming and taking over everything, and they've taken us all prisoner. We're basically slave labor, and we can't fight them off. You know, we've got like hunting rifles, and they've got tanks. Like, we can't fight these people off. We need weapons, and you've got a whole ship full of weapons. Like, why don't you give those to us and let us do something right? Okay, so once again, tough choice, right? Are you going to do the job and get paid? Are you going to deliver the guns to the hobgoblins? Or are you going to do what's right and give the weapons to the resistance so they can fight off the hobgoblin invaders? Firefly does this with the delivery of medicine and the train job, right? This isn't medicine. It's not quite as cut and dried, but it's pretty close. I mean, we made a point of showing how bad the people are being treated in the labor camp. So we make it clear that, like, these people are being tortured, and the hobgoblins are cruel to them. It's a concentration camp. They're all going to work here until they die. And the fact that players have an opportunity to save an innocent guy from getting eaten by hobhounds, right? Interesting choice, tough choice. What are the players going to do? Well, the good characters are going to give them weapons to the resistance. The neutral characters are going to sell it to the hobgoblins and say, look, this isn't our business. We're here to do the job and get paid. Okay. But now I, as the developer, have to accommodate both parts of that. This is a real problem. Now, it's a challenge. There's some resistance to this in the whole company, because there's an attitude that if there's any section of this adventure that the GM doesn't use, if I write 2 pages on going left and then another 2 pages on going right, the GM that went left is going to get mad at those 2 pages about going right. And he's going to say, I spent $24.99 on this adventure, $22.99, however much it is, and I expect to use every page of it. And those 2 pages that detail an option my players didn't take are wasted pages as far as I'm concerned. Well, that's not how I see it. That's not how a lot of GMs see it. But I was warned about that going in. So with the help of editorial, we figured out how to do it. And I brainstormed this also with Keeley. The thing I miss the most about being in the office is that Keeley's 3 feet away from me. And if I had a problem like this scene, how am I going to do this? I could walk into one of our breakout rooms with Keeley, and we could just brainstorm this thing for half an hour up on the whiteboard until we had it figured out. And then I could go back and I could pound it out on the typewriter until it was solid. And editorial, Kieran helped me figure out how to format all of this, which is a not insignificant part of the challenge. Like, you have to figure out how. So the way that we did it is there's basically 2 different paths that players can take, but they all end up taking the truck up the mountain. If you're either taking the truck up the mountain to deliver it to the hobgoblin depot, or you're taking it up the mountain to deliver to the resistance. In one of those stories, you've got hobgoblin guards on your truck that help you fight off resistance that attack in helicopters. In the other version, you kill the guards and you get attacked by hobgoblins and helicopters instead. And the dwarf is on your truck helping you, right? And so there's these different moving pieces. There's the dwarf spy, there's the hobgoblins that have been put on the truck to tell you where to drive. And then there's the helicopters, which can hovercopters, whatever, that can be carrying either hobgoblin soldiers or resistance fighters, depending on which path you took. And it all leads to this perilous chase scene with you in the truck winding your way up the mountain, pursued by other trucks that have got more bad guys in it, and you're getting shot at from the guys in the hovercopters. And then it all kind of ends with this climactic scene where you hit a tunnel and the helicopter tries to follow you in, and we wrap up the chase. Importantly, it does not use the chase rules, because there actually isn't you can't like get away, and we don't want, there's a 1-lane highway, like they can't pass you. It's really just a bunch of people attacking you on a moving truck with a bunch of cargo crates all around. So there's potential cargo, and there's the little driver cockpit which is pretty cramped. And so the idea is there's a lot of action going on with people like rappelling out of the hover cycle and landing on the truck, and like hand-to-hand kind of James Bond action, and some sniper movement, and, you know, lots of potential for an ever-evolving, changing chase sequence, which I hope you like, because I really dug it. Like, I love how it turned out. But getting it to, like, how are we going to present it? Are we going to do the whole thing where if you follow the rebels, then this happens, or if you follow the hobgoblins, this happens? Or do we want to sort of go back and forth? Do we want to present all the moving pieces and just tell the GM how they all, like, figuring out the format of how to present it to the reader is really important, because you have to sort of walk them through it. And especially if we're thinking of this as something that maybe new GMs or new players might be playing for the first time. This is a level 1 adventure, right? And the players are like level 2 for the get-around job. And they've never played a sequence like this before. And we have to kind of guide the players and the GM through it. And Kieran was so invaluable. The whole editorial team, but of course I talked mostly to Kieran, because Kieran was my kind of advocate, my sort of representative, my liaison in the editorial team. So as they and Judy and Leo and everybody else were trying to figure out how to make this sequence work best, and they had to restructure it pretty heavily from how I originally had it laid out. But it came out phenomenal, and I'm deeply in debt to the editorial department for helping this adventure become a better version of itself, which is really kind of how it all turned out. Well, anyway, the get-around job, again, goes bad, right? Either you lose a bunch of the money, or it kind of goes bad, and you find out later that you were sort of set up for it to go bad. You don't know this right away, but this is all part of Lord St. John's machinations. And St. John is the guy that's next to me here in this portrait. St. John is one of our 2 adversaries for this campaign. He's a drow crime boss, part of the Golden League. And I wanted to get you a chance to meet him early. For those of you that know Starfinder Adventure Paths, we did Dawn of Flame, and there's a frequent critique of Dawn of Flame that you never really get to meet or come face-to-face with the bad guys. The whole Ifriti invasion is masterminded by a princess who never leaves the plane of fire. Her self-appointed bad guy, the General Kane, who's running the whole invasion, is a purely off-screen figure that you interact with once in a while, through, like, you find email from him or something like that. You find communications sent to him or from him, but you don't really meet him until literally the final encounter of the entire 6-volume AP. And it can take 1.5 years to play one of those things through, right? And by the time you get to the end, you're like, okay, it's impossible to satisfy the level of hype and expectation that Kame has created. And it's a pretty great fight. Chris made it a lot better. I mean, I wrote that volume, the 6th volume of Dawn of Flame, and I did my best with it. But Sims amped it up, cranked it up to 11, and he made Kame as badass as we could make him. But a lot of people felt like they just didn't have a connection to him. And I thought back to Star Wars, and I thought about Jabba the Hutt. And those of you that remember, Jabba is mentioned in the first film, and originally there was a scene with Jabba, right? Like they cut because they couldn't get the special effects to work. But there's a scene with Han Solo, talking to Jabba in the hangar bay. And if they could have gotten the special effects to work, they would have kept it. And they do. Later Lucas re-adds it, right? He re-adds it to the film. But that's because it's really important to have him there so that Return of the Jedi pays off. Like you can still do it. And that whole Jabba sequence in Return of the Jedi is just pure gold. It's maybe the best sequence in the whole film, in the whole series. But if you can show him early and have the player characters interacting with the villain early in a non-violent situation, then when he shows up later and he is the bad guy, it all feels much more meaningful. Like you have a face to attach to this guy that's harassing you for 6 volumes. So I wanted to have that. And we created a scene with Sinjin where he recruits the players to steal the Oliphant, this cutting-edge starship, experimental starship, from their employers, from the company. Let's talk about the Oliphant for a minute. Now, we'll get a picture of the Oliphant next volume and when we do this next episode, but Leo designed it. But the Oliphant had to have something unique about it. It had to have an unusual characteristic, some kind of new cutting-edge high technology, something new that made it stand out from every other starship and also explained why everybody wants it. Well, what could be new and different about it? In other games, it would be engines, or it would be faster, or it would have some new weapon system or a cloaking device or something. None of that was relevant to this adventure path because this adventure path is about people trying to make a living. Now, yes, it's a dangerous galaxy, but it shouldn't be about weapons. I didn't want the ship just to have a big new weapon on it because then that would be a ship that mercenaries would want, or like, soldiers. The player characters are not soldiers. The player characters are working class people. They don't need a new gun. At least not for their job. And if it was a new gun, then I would have everybody, all the people chasing them would be militaries. That wasn't exactly what I wanted. I brainstormed it for a while, and the eventual answer was something that I was worried that a lot of players and GMs would find anticlimactic, and that is a way to store more cargo on your ship. Now, I know that doesn't sound like much, but bear with me for a minute. Cargo holds in Starfinder are weird, and they don't make a lot of sense because expansion bays don't scale properly by the size of your starship. A transport, a medium transport, which is a perfect kind of ship that the players would have at low level, a Millennium Falcon, has 5 expansion bays. And it can carry a maximum of 5 cargo holds, or 125 tons of cargo. Okay. But the biggest ship in the game, a bulk freighter, which is like a mile long or something insane, only has 10 expansion bays. And so this gigantic ship, which is enormous, can only hold as twice as much as the Millennium Falcon. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to rationalize this. At one point, I decided that maybe starship manufacturing technology in Starfinder is actually really bad. Like, we don't have the materials to make objects that big. And so, like, early skyscrapers, like the Empire State Building is an early skyscraper, and like the bottom floors of the Empire State Building are just enormous blocks of stone and steel because you need these huge pillars to sustain the incredible height of the building. Later on, we figured out how to put rebar inside of concrete and all kinds of reinforced, materials. We could build skyscrapers that were slender. But in the 1930s, you couldn't do that. You didn't know how. And I thought maybe we build starships like they're 1938 skyscrapers in Starfinder, and they're just mostly metal. Like, they are just literally mostly metal, and you have to build them that way so they can sustain the stress of space travel. I'm thinking too hard. The result of it is, however you want to try to explain it, the simple truth is that this is the system we've got. And if a starship that's a medium transport had something like a null space cargo hold that could carry twice as much cargo in a cargo bay as it normally could, instead of 25 tons per cargo bay, it could carry 50. Well, now the Millennium Falcon can carry as much cargo as the largest bulk cruiser. Okay, that sounds perfect for a merchant ship. Like, if you're running an economic system, and the merchant rules in this volume play into this, you want to be able to carry as much cargo as you can on any individual job. If someone's like, well, yeah, I can sell you these juju berries or whatever, and you can make a fortune off of them if you take them to Akaton, but I got 500 tons of them, and I got to unload them. Well, you need a ship that can carry 500 tons. Well, okay, maybe you can't carry 500 tons because you only have 5 cargo bays, but you can carry 250 tons because your cargo bays are all null space cargo holds. So that means that you can take more of the cargo, and that means you can make more money when you sell it off. Like, your ability to make money as a merchant is directly linked to how much cargo you can carry on your ship. And anybody who wants to make a fortune tries to have as big a cargo hold as possible. So giving the player characters null space cargo holds that allow them to hold twice as much as normal meant that they would be able to make twice as much money. And that would be really good. Well, so I had to give St. John a speech that basically sold the players on this idea. And he talks about the potential and also all the other kinds of other things you could do with null space like that. Well, what if we just built, like, what if we could carry twice as many medical supplies to, colonies attacked by the swarm? Or what if we could carry twice as much food to colony worlds? Or what if we could just make Absalom Station twice as big on the inside as it is on the outside? That would sure solve our housing crisis, and so on. I suspect some GMs are going to sort of feel like null space cargo hold is kind of a sad trombone noise, kind of a womp womp noise, but it makes sense in the setting and it's appropriate to the theme. And then there's Resora. Aleene Resora is the other main antagonist. And she's the one in charge of the Oliphant project. She's the one that's a sibling to one of the PCs, maybe. And she's the one who the PCs break into her office when they have to steal the Oliphant. St. John presents the players with a choice. He's like, look, you're probably going to be fired anyway. Like, all these terrible things have happened to you. So you may as well quit, muster out. And that's an old traveler phrase where you basically cash in your retirement benefits. You've got these contracts with all these employee bonuses. Well, you may as well quit, cash all that stuff out. You'll get some stock shares in the company. And then because you own stock in the company, you can get on to the Horse-Eye Orbital Plate, this Starship construction station, which is where the Oliphant is being kept. Nobody can get onto the Oliphant unless you are a shareholder in the company. Well, you'll be a shareholder when you quit because you'll get shares from your contract. Okay. Now, what's going on here is that St. John has actually arranged this the whole time. Like, he's the one that tested the players. He's the one that he found out about them from the Akaton job, the Hive Market gig. He tested them with the Gitaron job, and now he's like, okay, now I know what makes you guys jump, whether you jump left or jump right. I've got you figured out now. And so I can make you this pitch. And sure enough, the players get fired. They get fired by AI, which is one of my favorite things in this volume, because if there is any better sign of the far future dystopia, it's got to be getting fired by a computer for failing to perform, or failing to bring in enough credits. So the players end up sneaking into this office complex and stealing the Oliphant. It's kind of a dungeon crawl, but I think of it more as a shadow run, right? It's pretty classic. Break into this office building, steal a starship. And it was a challenge to develop because we wanted to make sure that there was a lot of, I had this map of the office building. Well, let's use it, right? Like, let's make sure that there's a lot of encounters in it and that they're suitably different from each other. And we wanted to make it alive so that as the players move through the building, the bad guys are also moving. and they react how the players move. And this is where the Roombas come in, the space Roombas, and another new Anacite, sort of invisible guardian Anacite that we created, the Anacite Sentry, show up. I think we actually have a boss fight picture for that. Yeah. And I think it worked out okay. It's not actually the conclusion of the adventure, because once you steal the ship and you take it to where you're supposed to drop it off with St. John, there's a kind of sudden but inevitable betrayal. If we keep up the Shadowrun metaphor here, like, everybody knows that, you know, your Mr. Jones is going to betray you, and you know it's going to happen. So I don't think it's hard. I could have had them not. I could have written it differently, but I decided to just lean into it instead. I mean, they're drow, right? So they're sort of traditionally evil. And so when Deminda and the other drow try to kill you and take the ship, there's a final fight with Deminda and the other drow on this little asteroid rendezvous spot. I'm pretty happy with how it all turned out, but I'm not going to lie, it was a lot of work. And you know, we had to make some kind of difficult choices. I would love to see the adventure where Deminda lives. She's kind of an interesting looking character. Her background didn't really get explored. She's kind of like one of St. John's bodyguards. I would love to do the game where she survives and comes back as a recurring menace, maybe in volume 2 or 4 or something. We didn't get a chance to do that. We sort of assumed that the players kill her. But you know, she looked pretty cool. I would have. There she is. Maybe she did come back for a future adventure. Once this is, at this point, after this, we're going to move on to volume 2 of the adventure path, which is Merchants of the Void, written by Leo Glass. And as I mentioned in a previous episode, it's really these first 2 volumes that establish the do the job, get paid kind of feel for the whole AP, when the characters are low level and they need to do the job to get credits. Volume 2 is a big change, though, because the players in Volume 1 are constantly being told what to do and their ship's got no guns. Like, it's very much a kind of the company has power over us kind of feel. But now you've stolen this ship and the guy you were supposed to deliver it to has betrayed you, so you may as well keep it, right? So now you're on your own, and you quit the company, and Tariqa quits also, and she's going to start finding you gig. And now you're taking control of your own destiny. You have your ship, and you can try to make a life for yourself, running jobs in the greater Starfinder galaxy. Volume 2 spends a lot of time in the Vesperium. We had done the the Near Space source book, which right around this time. And I love that book. I think it's got tons of great plot hooks and story potential in it. The Vesperium is a really interesting species, kind of Patchworld's Klingons, in terms of the role that they fill in the narrative. Obviously very different physically and culturally, but they fulfill that role of a kind of honorable antagonist. The lawful evil empire that you cooperate with when you have to. And that you hope to maybe bring around one day. And Leo wrote a fascinating adventure, which departed in many ways from my original outline, but turned out much better than I really thought the adventure was going to be. So tune in. Next episode, we'll do Merchants of the Void. In the meantime, reach out to me on Twitter. Like, I'm on Twitter at Dr. Comics, all one word, DocTorComics. And you can respond here on this YouTube video, or reach out to me, and I would love to answer your questions and get specific about answering things that you might be wondering about this adventure, the particular volumes or the entire adventure path. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.